The Kansas City Chiefs fall to the Denver Broncos by the score of 38-0. This will not be the tenor of a video you would expect to get from a 38-0 defeat, but this will be, look, that was not unexpected. We expected a loss. I don't think that the way that loss looked was how we were maybe expecting it, but there were notes to be had all around, and I have a whole lot of talking points for this game, so let's get into them. This was a rough showing all around, to be sure. You expected a loss for sure. There was not a whole lot of starters playing. There were not a whole lot of starters playing in their normal spots. I seemed to see a lot of Charles Omenihu at defensive tackle as opposed to edge. Perhaps I am mistaken on that. Maybe it's just confirmation bias, but even there, I don't think there was a lot of fight in this game, and there's a couple guys that I think maybe worth pointing out in this video. I don't know if they'll be back next year. Hard to say that after a pointless Week 18 loss, but while the stats are not important in a game like this, the performances are, and I think that's what you're looking at in a game like this, much the same way that you are in the preseason, and I just don't think there were a whole lot of guys playing for roster spots when really probably they should have been. Speaking of the loss and the margin, I think we all believe that had the roles been reversed and the Denver Broncos had the number one seed and the Kansas City Chiefs were fighting for their playoff lives, the Chiefs likely would have won by the score of something like 17-0, not 38-0. And I have Lou Holtz written down there at number 2. Lou Holtz, I really like Lou Holtz, and he had a book he published, Wins, Losses, and Lessons. I read this guy. I want to say it was 15 years ago. I read this book, and shortly before I moved up to St. Joe. And there was an anecdote in that book where Lou Holtz said, and I'm not going to know the score, I'm not going to know the teams, I apologize for that. I'm sure this will be verifiable. He was coaching a school that was struggling. He took a head coaching position at a school that was not to the standards of the Blue Bloods, right? And he was doing a rebuilding process. And he suffered something like a 48-0 just drubbing by a coach that he knew. And he went across the sidelines after the game and said, "Hey, what are we doing there?" And the other coach said, "Look, this is college football. All of your guys are on scholarship too. If you did not want this score to be the final score, you should have scored some points." Something to that effect. Later, I don't know if Lou Holtz had rebuilt that school or if he was at Notre Dame and he made Notre Dame into a powerhouse, but he saw the same coach and he returned the favor. And after the game, Lou Holtz said, "Hey, if you did not want that outcome, you should have scored some points." Guys, I think Andy Reid might have something for the Denver Broncos the next time the Kansas City Chiefs play them, because this was, look, they ran the ball a whole lot, but they were very aggressive. They were very, very aggressive, and I understand you're playing for your playoff lives, but yeah, these guys are all getting paid too. Should have scored some points, but I don't think that the class necessarily was maybe there. Maybe I'm overreacting, but I do think that there was maybe a little bit more aggressive play calling than was necessary. And it's a tough position because you want to get your guys ramped up for the playoffs, et cetera, if you're the Denver Broncos. I think there will be some bad blood from this, and I think there's going to be a whole lot of guys who remember this going forward. Now, that said, going forward leads me to talk about DJ Humphries. I am not sure we see DJ Humphries in the playoffs. DJ Humphries did not acquit himself very well in this football game. As far as I am concerned, he did look stiff. Maybe that is coming back from the injury that sidelined him after a year of inactivity. Maybe 1 week is enough to get him limbered up. He looked like he had dead legs out there to me, and I don't know that's what you want protecting Patrick Mahomes when a three-peat is on the line. I think we may go into the playoffs seeing Joe Thuney out there at left tackle. It would not upset me. just kind of stinks that they did try something eventually to address the position. It seemed by the timing of the acquisition that perhaps that had been the plan all along, because he was signed kind of the week that he announced that he was back, and the Chiefs had waited all that time, and then it was not until after Humphries was acquired by the Kansas City Chiefs that they attempted to move Joe Thuney to left tackle. So it seems to me that the plan all along was, hey, let's get the young guys in there as long as it doesn't cause too much distress, as long as we're not losing too many games, and they were not, that we would allow the growing pains at the position until the ability for, or the opportunity for, DJ Humphries to be a Kansas City Chief arises. It arose. He came back. He was injured. Now he does not look like a starting left tackle in the NFL. So they will, I think, assess that during the bye week. Is he more mobile than he looked on the field during this game to the Denver Broncos? And again, look, that was the Denver Broncos starting defense. The sack that he gave up to Benito was excruciatingly bad. But, I mean, top of my head, I don't think he got a hand on Benito really on that play. So we will see what goes on there. Playing left guard, Kingsley had some trouble picking up stunts, and he does look uncomfortable. This might be an often overlooked sort of an often overlooked trial and tribulation of the position switch from offensive tackle to offensive guard, but it's a completely different stance. And he did look uncomfortable in it. He had an awkward stance, but those things can be worked on. I thought that he did show the strength necessary to be able to handle the defensive tackles in the NFL. I thought that he did show the mobility necessary. Again, I think a lot of the problems that he had out there were off the ball problems, which could be problems with his stance and making reads. When you're playing offensive tackle, making a read from your outside is completely different than when you're playing offensive guard. When you're playing guard, the tackle is in your peripheral vision. So your vision is obstructed to the side. That is an awareness thing. It is not a performance thing, physical performance thing. So the outcome of Kingsley at the left guard position, I thought that it was an interesting choice to put Kingsley at the left guard position if your modus operandi is to see him in a role that he might play, because it is Trey Smith that will be leaving and not Joe Thuney, unless Joe Thuney becomes the left tackle. Unless Joe Thuney retires, there are, circumstances there. But I think that it would have been more profitable to see Kingsley at the right guard for the majority of the game. So I do think a lot of the problems he had can be worked on. I think that might be where we see him in the future. I do think that he can play tackle in the NFL. I do think that it will probably be a matter of experience. So keeping him on the field as opposed to on the sidelines would be a good thing. That said, I had mentioned Wanya Morris playing offensive guard in this game. The immediate starting place along the offensive line interior that could be opening up, because Creed had signed a 3-year deal coming into the season, or shortly after the beginning of the season, was right guard. And maybe I'm wrong, but every time I saw Wanya Morris, again, could be confirmation bias, he was playing offensive tackle. So I think that they are set on Wanya at least getting a try at offensive tackle positions. He looks good on the right side to me. He looks much better than he did on the left side. And again, in today's NFL, most defenses have at least a threat off of each of the corners. So the right tackle, left tackle dichotomy is perhaps not as strong as once it was. But I do think that there is a difference still in the NFL, and especially when you're talking about a blind side for a right-handed quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, teams are going to want to rush off of that left side. Moving on to non-offensive line positions. I have just one note on the offense because there's not a whole lot that needs to be said. Carson Steele, I'll address this. Carson Steele had a 3.1 yard average. I think it was, 8 carries for 25 yards, 8 carries for 28 yards, something like that. Whatever a 3.1 average maths out to be. This is a good Broncos defense, and they're good against the run. And with a backup offensive line, he didn't do anything to stand out, but he didn't do anything I thought to give himself problems. I did think that he looked pretty good in pass blocking. His chips were effective, even if sometimes the offensive tackles are still oversetting to the outside when they have chip help. I don't know why that problem is popping up. That is to say, when the fullback is chipping to help, he is coming outside of the offensive tackle, meaning that his chip is going to push the pass rusher back to the inside. We saw, particularly with DJ Humphries on a couple occasions, that chip move pushed the defender inside of DJ Humphries, who had overset to the outside, knowing that he had to have inside leverage because the help was coming from the outside. I know that's a lot of words that probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense off the tip of the tongue, but Carson Steele looked better in those situations than did DJ Humphries, and I think that's a problem. But the one offensive note here that is maybe worth taking from this game, I do think that I thought I had it in here, but I guess I did not. CJ Hansen didn't look bad. He didn't look good, but he didn't look bad. And I think that is a good building block for CJ Hansen going forward. I think that that is basically the most you could have asked for from CJ Hansen in this game from a small school. No NFL reps to this point, going up against a very good defense. But the position player worth talking about on the offense is Nico Remigio. There were 98 yards passing from Carson Wentz, and 48 of those yards went to Nico Remigio. I think he will be in the wide receiver rotation next year. He looked like he belonged on that field. He looked like he belonged against a starting 2 receptions, 48 yards. I understand. But he had as many explosive plays in this game as the Kansas City Chiefs offense had for like the first 6 weeks of the season, right? Not a whole lot of explosion from this offense. A cagey, small fighter at wide receiver. Again, I will say it again, reminds me of Albert Wilson. Patrick Mahomes had that connection with Albert Wilson in the one game he played during his rookie season. He has not had that type of wide receiver since. Nico Remigio looks like that type of wide receiver. The one real concern from this game, and, it's one kick, it was 51 yards, but he missed. Harrison Butker has not looked like Harrison Butker since he has returned from that injury. Is this a problem moving forward? I don't know. You will remember that prior to the injury, every field goal attempt that he had this season, there was a big deal made of this. He kicked and then went down to one knee in a swift motion, fell to a knee after every kick. Maybe I'm missing this. I don't think he's doing that since his return. So maybe that's just something mechanical that he has to get figured out. He had learned through the pain of whatever injury was arising, we'll get back to that, was arising, that he had changed his mechanics ever so slightly. And now those mechanics are not as steadfast as they were. Big note for the defense. I don't care if the Kansas City Chiefs were playing the Marion Joseph, I don't care if it was the Marion Joseph's School for the Financially Distraught out there against the Denver Broncos. Bo Nix had a great day, and that's not a good sign regardless of who was out there on defense. I thought that the effort may have been lacking a few places. Najee Johnson had a very rough day. Now, Najee Johnson is not a number one cornerback. Najee Johnson was going up against a number one wide receiver a lot of the time and a number one quarterback who looks to be pretty good. This is why Najee Johnson is not a number one cornerback, but I thought that it's difficult to see a guy who I believe he runs a 4.37 40. It's difficult to see that guy trailing so often in a game. There has to be something wrong with his reads that is leading him to trail so many players so often. Cam Jones I don't know if Cam Jones is back next year. In my opinion, very rough game from Cam Jones. He did not seem to be putting in the effort sometimes. And what I mean by that was there was a couple times where there was a missed tackle, and Cam Jones, Nick Bolton would have been right there to wrap that guy up. He's not Nick Bolton, I understand that, but a linebacker is supposed to be in position to make that play. He was not. It seemed like he was jogging on the field oftentimes. He missed a couple tackles, at least one, to memory. Rough game for a guy who is coming into the league as a UDFA on his second year in that UDFA position when linebackers are so readily available, not only in the draft, but through the ranks of the UDFA in a year where the Chiefs are likely to be looking for linebackers. That sounds superfluous to an extent. You only have so many scouts. There are only so many hours in the day. So when they know they're probably going to have to replace Nick Bolton, there's going to be a disproportionate amount of time spent on linebackers in this class, which means there's likely to be a disproportionate amount of linebackers targeted, which means maybe a guy falls to them in the draft. They take him. That's a Nick Bolton replacement. Maybe some guys fall out of the draft. The Chiefs like them. They've watched their tape, and they go to make that signing. Blake Lynch looked as good as you could expect for a guy who has been in the building for days. So maybe that becomes the next guy up. He is only a couple years older than Cam Jones, despite so much more time in the NFL. So this is going to sound like a bad consolation prize, and it is, but it did seem as if the Broncos really respected Felix Anudike-Uzomah. Didn't make a whole lot of plays, but he got a whole lot of attention. Sometimes, especially in a game where the Broncos, this was a had-to-have-it game for the Broncos. They would have spent time game planning anything that they could, not knowing who was going to be out there for the Kansas City Chiefs. They would have likely understood that FAU was going to be on the field for an extended amount of time, and it looked like he got a whole lot of attention. The Broncos maybe didn't fear FAU, but they certainly knew that he could make plays if a play was available to be made. So they wanted to stop him from making those plays. Sometimes you can read into that for your sort of scouting ideas. Joshua Uche, playing the role of coverage linebacker, is a very rough experience. And Uche's contract is up at the end of the season. I do not expect him to be back, despite the fact that the Kansas City Chiefs will once again be on the hunt for people who can get to the quarterback. Another bright side potentially for this defense, I will be interested to see grade numbers on Keith Taylor. How did he grade out versus this offense? It looked to me like he had the best game of those guys who were out there. So it might be that when we get to the divisional round, Keith Taylor becomes one of these guys on whom the Kansas City Chiefs are leaning a little bit more heavily than Joshua Williams or even Najee Johnson at this point. I do think he had a good day. Perhaps I am mistaken. There's a lot you can't really catch first couple times through a game, things like that. But he looked solid. I did not notice him being the target of a whole lot of passes. He did bobble the double tip touchdown reception. Guys, I think sometimes that's just a football play. I don't think that that is something that Keith Taylor is going to do 9 times out of 10. Probably 7 times out of 10, that football is not there. It was Najee Johnson who had batted it, if you remember the play, and changed the course of his projection. It looked like he was maybe going to come up with the interception, but Najee Johnson had seemingly not knowingly even batted it. I don't think that he was even aware that the football was where it was until he touched it. So that was batted by Johnson, batted by Keith Taylor, bounced off Keith Taylor, and then ended up in the hands of, was it Vilas or whatever? So is what it is. That's a football play. That's the way the football bounces. The game ball, however, in this game, undoubtedly goes to Matt Araiza, in my opinion. 5 punts, 5 plant, 5 punts, 245 yards, and 3 punts inside the 20. This guy could be a weapon for Kansas City heading into the playoffs. We all know how field position is a big deal the deeper in the playoffs that you go. We have seen special teams play a big role in the playoffs for the Kansas City Chiefs time and again during this run. And Matt Araiza is a guy who you can trust to just absolutely kick the dog snot out of the ball. That is what I have for this game. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other Kansas City Chiefs fans. And if you find yourself here by chance, but not design, the Chiefs are the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week, and I hope to have you back for the next one.